Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something really fundamental to understanding life as we know it, speciation.
That's right. It's the evolutionary process that gives us all the different species out there.
Yeah, and if you've ever looked around and just wondered, how did we get all these different creatures? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore for you today. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources, from Darwin himself right up to modern genetics and ecology.
And our mission, really, is to pull out the core ideas. How do species arise? Why do they stay separate?
Exactly. Hopefully we'll uncover a few surprising things along the way and make it all clear.
Absolutely. It's the engine of biodiversity, really.
Mhm.
Understanding speciation gives you such a deeper appreciation for, well, the sheer variety of life.
Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with a bit of history.
Sounds good. Context is always helpful.
We all know Darwin, obviously, Origin of Species. But the actual word speciation, that came a bit later, didn't
It
it?
did, yeah, 1906. A biologist named Orator F. Cook coined it.
Orator F. Cook.
Okay. And he used it specifically to talk about when one evolutionary line splits into two or more, that's cletogenesis,
Right, splitting off.
to distinguish it from anagenesis, which is just, changes happening within a single lineage over time.
That's a key difference. So Cook defined the branching part.
But Darwin, of course, laid all the groundwork back in 1859. He was the first to really detail how natural selection could cause this divergence.
And he thought about sexual selection too, right? Even if it puzzled him a bit.
He did. He recognized it as a potential factor, but yeah, he found it, let's say, problematic or difficult to fully explain at the time.
Which kind of leads us into what people call Darwin's dilemma.
Yes. Chapter 6 of The Origin, Difficulties of the Theory.
Right. He basically asked, if evolution is gradual, all these tiny steps, why don't we see just countless intermediate forms all over the place? Why are species generally so distinct?
Exactly. It's a great question. And it had two parts, really. First, the lack of those in-between forms now in the living world, sort of the spatial problem. Why isn't everything just a smooth gradient?
Like, why no half-lizard, half-bird creatures thriving somewhere?
Precisely. And second, the fossil record, the time aspect. If it's slow and continuous, shouldn't the rocks be full of perfectly graded sequences?
Yeah, he thought those transitional forms must have existed in great numbers. So their absence, or at least rarity, was a real challenge for
It
him.
was a significant sticking point.
So the very fact that species are generally well-defined suggests there's something about selection that, actively creates and maintains these separate groups.
That's the implication. And there's a really fascinating idea about how the first part of that dilemma, the lack of intermediates now, might be resolved. It involves sexual reproduction itself.
Oh, okay. How so?
It connects to something called the cost of rarity.
The cost of rarity. Okay, unpack that for me. It sounds a bit backward. Wouldn't rare things just mate with anything?
You'd think so, maybe. But imagine a situation, say, on a resource gradient, where lots of different, very specialized species evolve.
Okay, each using a tiny slice of the resources.
Right. So each one would naturally have a pretty small population. They'd all be quite rare, relatively speaking.
Makes sense.
Now, if you're an individual in one of those rare species, finding a mate, another member of your own species, becomes really difficult.
Ah, like finding a needle in a haystack full of other kinds of needles.
Exactly like that. So what happens if one species, just by luck or maybe a small environmental change, starts to increase its numbers just a little?
Well, then it'd be easier for its members to find each other, I guess.
Precisely. They find mates more easily, they reproduce more successfully, their numbers go up even more. Meanwhile, the species that are still rare are struggling.
It creates a kind of snowball effect.
That's the term, yeah, a snowball effect. The commoner species gets commoner just because it's easier to find mates, and this can actually drive the rarer specialized species towards extinction.
Wow. So rarity itself becomes a disadvantage in the mating game.
It does, and you end up with fewer but more populous and more distinct species. There can also be indirect costs, too.
Like what?
Like the energy and time spent searching for a scarce mate, maybe increased risk of getting eaten while you're wandering around looking. It all adds up.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And then there was that other term you mentioned, cornophilia.
Right, koinophilia. It's the idea that sexual creatures tend to, well, prefer mates that look normal or average for their species.
Avoid the weirdos.
Basically, yeah. The thinking is that unusual features might signal a potentially harmful mutation, so choosing an average-looking mate is like playing it safe genetically.
Interesting, like a built-in preference for the status quo, appearance-wise.
You could put it that way. And this preference for the common phenotype contributes to uniformity within a species.
Ah, like in bird field guides, where one picture often works for the whole species.
Exactly, maybe one for the male, one for the female if they're different. But sexual reproduction plus koinophilia tends to filter out extreme variations in looks.
And that links back to speciation how?
Well, if you prefer mates that look like the average member of your group, you're less likely to mate with individuals from another group that looks different.
Right. That avoidance of difference is a form of reproductive isolation starting to happen.
It's a key step. It helps maintain those species boundaries. Now, contrast that with asexual organisms.
No mates needed.
Right, no cost of rarity in the same way. So they can become incredibly specialized, sometimes forming almost a continuous spectrum of forms. Defining distinct species based just on looks, morphospecies can be really tricky.
So the whole mating game in sexual species really shapes the landscape of life into these more discrete packages. Fascinating.
It seems to play a huge role.
Okay, let's shift gears then. How does geography fit in? The physical separation of populations. I know there are different modes.
That's right. We usually talk about 4 main geographic modes based on how isolated the populations become. Allopatric, Parapatric, Parapatric, and Sympatric.
And there's still debate about which is most important. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Definitely an active area of research, how much each contributes to overall biodiversity.
Okay, let's start with the classic, Allopatric. Allo different, Patrick homeland. Complete separation.
Exactly. Allopatric speciation is when a population gets split into 2 or more groups that are geographically isolated from each other. Think mountain range forming, river changing course, maybe a group colonizing a distant island.
So no more gene flow between them.
Correct. Once they're separate, they start evolving independently. They might face different environments, so natural selection favors different traits.
And different random mutations pop up in each group.
Right. Over time, enough genetic and physical differences accumulate so that even if they meet again, they can't successfully interbreed anymore. They've become separate species. Isolation is the key first step.
And island genetics fits here perfectly, right? Islands seem like the ultimate isolation chambers.
They really are classic natural labs. Isolation, often unique resources or maybe limited resources, it can lead to rapid evolution. You get things like island dwarfism.
Little elephants.
Right. Or gigantism sometimes too, like the Komodo dragon. And of course, the Galapagos.
Darwin, finches, and tortoises.
The very same. He noticed the tortoises differed between islands, the finches had different beaks. It took him a while to process, but back in England, ornithologists confirmed those finches weren't just varieties, they were distinct species.
And that became a prime example of adaptive radiation. Textbook case. One ancestor arriving, diversifying to use all the different food sources on the different islands, driven by that geographic isolation.
Okay, so that's Allopatric. What about Parapatric? Sounds similar, but smaller scale.
It is similar, often seen as a special kind of allopatric speciation. Peri, meaning around the edge. It's when a new species forms from a small population that gets isolated at the periphery of the main ancestral range. A little splinter group breaks off.
Kind of, yeah. And the key here is the small size of that founding group.
Ah, the founder effect.
Exactly. The genes in that small group might just by chance be different in frequency from the main population. Like grabbing a small handful of mixed candies, you might get a weird ratio.
Right. Not representative.
So that initial bottleneck, plus random genetic drift, just chance fluctuations in genes, can cause really rapid divergence in that small, isolated population.
Are there clear examples?
Well, the biologist Ernst Mayr argued it was quite common based on bird distributions. The Australian robin Petroica multicolor in its island forms might be an example. And lab experiments with fruit flies.
The Drosophila.
Yeah, those subjected to bottlenecks. They've shown that reproductive isolation can evolve pretty quickly in small, founded populations.
Okay, so founder effect and drift are big players in Parapatric. Now, Parapatric, para, meaning beside, partial separation.
You got it. Parapatric speciation happens when populations are diverging, but they're still adjacent. Their ranges touch, maybe overlap a bit, so individuals can potentially still meet and interbreed. There's some gene flow possible.
But something stops them from just merging back together.
Right. Usually it's because the hybrid offspring, the ones resulting from interbreeding, are less fit than either of the parent types.
Ah, so selection actively works against the mixing.
Exactly. Imagine an environmental gradient, like wet to dry. Different traits are favored at each end, even if they can interbreed in the middle. If those hybrids don't do well in either the wet or the dry or the intermediate zone, selection will favor mating with your own kind.
So local adaptation drives the separation.
It does. And interestingly, studies on some Caucasian lizards suggest the habitat difference might be more important than just how long they've been separated.
Wow.
Yeah, two species separated longer but in similar habitats might still hybridize, while two separated more recently but in very different climates might not. Environment matters.
And ecological niches play a role here too.
Definitely. Having distinct niches helps reduce competition and can reinforce selection against hybrids if they aren't good at either lifestyle. Ring species, like some gulls.
Where they form a circle and the ends can't interbreed.
Yeah, those are sometimes seen as potential large-scale parapatric examples, though they're complicated. Or grasses adapting to polluted soil near mines, they diverge from neighbors on clean soil because the hybrids do poorly in both places.
Fascinating. Okay, last one. Sympatric. Same place. How does that even work?
It does seem the trickiest, doesn't it? Sympatric speciation is new species forming from an ancestor within the same geographic area, no physical barrier.
So how do they stop interbreeding?
It has to be driven by other factors. Strong disruptive selection is one possibility where extreme traits are favored over intermediate ones, or changes in behavior, especially mate choice, or habitat preference within the same area.
Like insects specializing on different plants in the same field.
That's a common scenario, yes. If they feed, mate, and lay eggs only on their specific host plant, they can become reproductively isolated over time. But the most spectacular examples are probably the cichlid fish in East Africa's Rift Valley lakes.
Oh yeah, Lake Victoria, Malawi, hundreds of species.
Hundreds, maybe over 1,600 species across those lakes, evolving relatively recently within the same bodies of water. It's an incredible explosion of diversity.
Oh, just tall how.
It seems to be a mix of specializing on different food sources within the lake. Some eat algae off rocks, some eat snails, some eat other fish, and, really importantly, sexual selection.
Based on color.
Very much so. Male color patterns are hugely diverse. If some females develop a preference for a new color pattern that pops up and only mate with males showing it, that can create an instant behavioral barrier to breeding with fish that have the old colors, even if they're swimming right next to each other.
So mate choice is carving out new species right there in the lake.
It looks like a major driver. There's also evidence for sympatric speciation in things like Tennessee cave salamanders, maybe driven by different ecological zones within the caves, and possibly crustaceans in Lake Baikal in Siberia.
And you mentioned budding speciation.
Yeah, that's a specific idea within sympatric speciation where maybe a small group within the larger population starts preferentially mating among themselves. Maybe there's some advantage to inbreeding in very specific stable conditions. Over time, they could become genetically isolated.
Okay. And the hawthorn fly. That sounded like a really clear recent example.
It's a great case study, Regalettus pomonella. They originally only used native hawthorn fruits. But when apples were introduced to North America...
Which aren't native.
Right. A population shifted to using apples instead. Now you have hawthorn fly populations and apple fly populations living side by side. They look the same, but they tend to stick to their own fruit.
And they're genetically different now.
Yep, studies show differences in gene frequencies, and they emerge at slightly different times synced to their host fruit. There's still a little hybridization, but not much. It really looks like sympatric speciation caught in the act, driven by that shift in host plant.
That's pretty amazing. Seeing evolution happen almost.
Ah.
Okay, so we've got the geographic contexts. What about the selection mechanisms that actually drive the changes? Reinforcement you mentioned.
Yes, reinforcement is a key one, also called the Wallace effect.
Strengthening the species boundary.
Essentially, yes. It's natural selection increasing reproductive isolation after two populations that started diverging come back into contact.
So they were separated, started changing, then met again.
Right. And if they haven't become fully reproductively isolated yet, they might interbreed. But if those hybrid offspring are less fit, maybe they're sterile. Maybe they just don't survive well.
Like mules from horses and donkeys.
Exactly like mules. If the hybrids are a dead end, then selection will favor individuals in both parent populations that avoid mating with the other population.
Stick to your own kind.
Pretty much. Selection favors assortative mating, choosing mates like yourself. This reduces wasted reproductive effort on unfit hybrids and strengthens the barrier between the groups. It can also be ecological. Maybe the hybrids just don't fit either parent's niche well.
And there's a genetic model for why hybrids might be unfit. The Bateson-Dobzhansky-Muller model?
That's the one. Bit of a mouthful, but the idea is simple enough. Imagine two populations isolated for a long time. Each accumulates different mutations. Within each population, new mutations are tested against the existing genes they have to work together.
Okay.
But when you bring genes from the two isolated populations together in a hybrid, you might get combinations that just don't cooperate, like putting parts from two different car models together they might not fit.
Bad interactions.
Negative epistatic interactions, technically. These make the hybrid less fit, maybe sterile, and the more differences accumulate while separated, the more likely these incompatibilities become. It's like a snowball effect of genetic conflict.
And we see evidence for this in labs.
We do, yeah. Studies with flies, mice, other organisms show these genetic incompatibilities arising. And reinforcement is especially crucial for Parapatric and Sympatric speciation to actually finish the job. Without it, the populations might just merge back together where they meet in what's called a hybrid zone.
Got it. Okay, what about ecological selection more broadly?
Well, we touched on it, but ecological speciation is just the idea that adapting to different environments or different resources drives the evolution of reproductive isolation.
So adapting to the environment causes the species split.
Often as a byproduct, yes. If you adapt to eat different food, your beak shape or body size might change, and that might affect who you can mate with or who finds you attractive.
The stickleback fish examples you mentioned earlier.
Perfect example. Different forms evolving repeatedly in freshwater lakes adapted to open water versus bottom feeding. Those adaptations come with reproductive isolation. Parallel speciation, seeing similar patterns happen independently, really strengthens the case for ecological selection being a major driver.
Makes sense. And finally, sexual selection again. We talked about mate choice driving sympatric speciation, but more generally.
Right. Sexual selection can definitely drive speciation, sometimes quite independently of adapting to the environment. But we use speciation in two slightly different ways here.
Yep.
First is the actual splitting, creating new species, because, say, preferences for certain male traits diverge like evolutionary fashion trends. That can happen without any obvious survival advantage just based on attractiveness. That's sometimes called non-etological speciation.
Driven purely by mate choice.
Exactly. The second way sexual selection relates is that idea we keep coming back to, Darwin's dilemma. The tendency for sexual species to be distinct units rather than a continuum. Cornophilia, avoiding unusual mates, helps maintain those species boundaries.
It's amazing that mate preference alone can be such a creative force in evolution. Okay, one more shift.
Yeah.
Can we make new species on purpose?
Well, animal breeding, husbandry, has created incredibly diverse breeds. Dogs, cattle, pigeons.
But are they really separate species? Can't a Great Dane still breed with a Chihuahua? Sort of.
Well, yes, and often domestic breeds can still interbreed with their wild ancestors, too, like dogs and wolves or cattle and wild ox. So the biological species concept based on reproductive isolation often doesn't fully apply. It's more like really, really rapid diversification within a species.
Accelerated variety. But what about in the lab? You mentioned some fruit fly experiments.
Right, those are probably the clearest examples of potentially creating reproductive isolation artificially. Late 1980s. Rice and salts experiment.
With the maize.
Yeah, they bred fruit flies based on whether they preferred, say, light wet conditions or dark dry conditions in a maze after 35 generations or so.
That's fast.
It is. They found the two lines showed significant reproductive isolation. They mostly preferred to mate with flies from their own preference line.
Just based on habitat choice.
Largely, yeah. They were just more likely to encounter and mate with similar preference flies. And Diane Dodd's experiment.
Different diets.
Right. Raising flies on starch versus maltose media. Again, after several generations, they showed strong reluctance to mate with flies raised on the other food source, and others have replicated this.
So we can induce reproductive isolation relatively quickly.
It seems so. But there's that alternative view, or maybe complementary view.
The cornophilia thing again.
Yeah. Maybe the different conditions just made the flies subtly different in ways the other group perceived as unusual or unhealthy. So their reluctance to mate might partly reflect that general avoidance of mates who seem off, rather than a specific barrier directly linked to the diet or maize preference itself.
A really interesting wrinkle. It brings back to that basic behavior.
Yep.
Okay, let's get into the genes themselves. What do we actually know about the specific genes that cause speciation?
It's maybe surprising, but we haven't identified that many specific speciation genes. The ones we have found often seem to be involved in reinforcement.
Later stages.
Right, solidifying the barrier when populations meet again. There was a key finding in 2008 identifying a gene in house mice that causes hybrid males to be sterile. So sometimes single genes can have a huge effect.
And sometimes the pattern of divergence is fuzzy, right? That trichotomy idea.
Exactly. Sometimes when looking at three related species, the genetic data makes it hard to tell which two split off first. It suggests the speciation events might have happened really close together in time.
Okay. What about the really big genetic changes, like polyploidy, getting extra sets of chromosomes? Huge in plants, I hear.
Oh, absolutely massive in plants.
Yeah.
Polyploidy having more than two sets of chromosomes can cause instant speciation, often sympatrically.
Instant. How?
Well, imagine a mutation creates a tetraploid plant, 4 sets of chromosomes, from diploid parents, 2 sets. If that tetraploid tries to mate back with a diploid, the offspring are triploid, 3 sets.
And triploids are usually...
Often sterile, yeah. Because their chromosomes can't pair up properly during meiosis to make viable eggs or sperm. So, boom, the tetraploid is reproductively isolated from its diploid parents in potentially just one generation. A new species.
Wow, that is fast. But you said it's not always a complete barrier in plants?
No, sometimes there are ways around it. Gene flow can still happen occasionally, maybe through unreduced gametes or weird hybrid crosses. But it's a major, major mechanism. It's thought loads of plant species, maybe even many animal lineages way back, have polyploidy in their history.
And these polyploids sometimes reproduce asexually too.
They do, yeah. Things like parthenogenesis, developing from unfertilized eggs, that helps them establish without needing mates, especially if they arise as a single individual initially. Much rarer in mammals, though usually lethal before birth.
Okay. What about the opposite hybrid speciation? Can mating between two different species lead to a new species?
It can, yes. Sometimes the hybrid offspring might have a unique combination of genes that makes them fitter than either parent species in a particular niche.
A best of both worlds scenario.
Potentially, yeah. If those hybrids can then become reproductively isolated from both parent species, they can form a new, stable hybrid species.
But that isolation part is tricky.
It is. Preventing back-crossing with the parents is often the biggest hurdle. So it's generally thought to be rare, especially in animals. The Mariana mallard might be an example. It's much more common in plants again, often linked with polyploidy.
Because polyploidy helps the hybrids become fertile.
Exactly. It solves the chromosome pairing problem and also gives them a boost of genetic diversity right away, which can help avoid inbreeding issues. We distinguish between homoploid hybrid speciation, where the chromosome number stays the same, which is very rare.
Like in those heliconius butterflies.
Right, or some sunflowers. And polyploid hybrid speciation, where the chromosome number increases, which is much more common in plants.
Okay. One last genetic mechanism, gene transposition. Jumping genes.
Yeah, jumping genes or transposable elements. Way back, Theodosius Dobzhansky speculated these mobile bits of DNA could jump around, land in new spots, and maybe disrupt gene function in hybrids, causing sterility and contributing to speciation.
An old idea, that.
An old idea, but for a long time, the focus was really on the slow accumulation of point mutations. But more recent work, like a study in 2006, showed that yes, gene transposition can contribute to building reproductive isolation. So Dobzhansky was likely onto something there too.
Just incredible, the variety of ways genetics can drive this. Okay, let's talk about timescales. How fast does speciation happen? Is it slow and steady, or does it happen in bursts?
The classic debate. Phyletic gradualism versus punctuated equilibrium.
Gradualism being slow, constant change.
Right. Small changes accumulating over vast stretches of time, smoothly transitioning one species into another.
And punctuated equilibrium, the Eldridge and Gould idea.
Exactly. They argued that species actually stay remarkably stable for most of their existence, long periods of stasis. Then, speciation happens relatively quickly in geological terms, in short bursts, followed by more stasis in the new species, punctuation marks in the long sentence of stability.
And the evidence. Seems like we see hints of both.
We do. We know evolution can be fast. Look at domestication maize from Teosinte in maybe a few thousand years. It makes you wonder why evolution in the wild often seems so much slower over the long haul.
Yeah, why isn't everything changing all the time?
Well, one reason is probably that most mutations are random, and most are harmful or neutral, not helpful. Getting the right combination of beneficial mutations to cause a major shift is statistically difficult. The old idea of group selection favoring an evolvability trait hasn't really held up.
So punctuated equilibrium kind of offers an answer to Darwin's second dilemma, the rarity of transitional fossils.
It does, potentially. The argument goes, if sexual species resist change because individuals avoid weird mates, koinophilia, then large, stable populations might not change much morphologically for long periods. Stasis.
So where does the change happen?
In small, isolated populations, islands, remote valleys, maybe populations surviving a bottleneck after a mass extinction, their mate choice might be limited, inbreeding might occur, genetic drift is stronger.
All the factors that can cause rapid change we talked about earlier.
Exactly. Founder effects, drift, maybe hybridization. If a new successful form arises quickly in one of these isolated pockets and then expands rapidly, what you'd see in the fossil record is a species appearing suddenly, persisting unchanged for ages, and then maybe disappearing.
Looking like punctuation, not gradual shifting.
Precisely. The fossil record often does look like that species appearing fully formed, sticking around, then vanishing. It aligns well with the punctuated equilibrium model.
That paints a really dynamic picture. Okay, so pulling this all together, speciation isn't one single thing, it's complex.
Absolutely. It's a whole suite of processes. Geographic setup matters, isolation or contact, different kinds of selection, natural sexual reinforcement, and multiple genetic routes, mutations, polyploidy, hybridization, jumping genes.
And that whole dynamic of sexual reproduction, the cost of rarity, the preference for the average koinophilia, seems key to understanding why we even have distinct species, maybe solving Darwin's original puzzle.
It provides a very compelling framework, I think. It helps explain both the formation and the maintenance of species boundaries.
And that debate about the speed, gradual versus punctuated, continues, fueled by fossils and genetics.
It does indeed. Which leads to a final thought, maybe, for you listening.
Yeah.
Just consider what all these mechanisms mean for the biodiversity we see around us now. And maybe more urgently, think about how the really rapid environmental changes happening today, climate change, habitat loss driven by us, how might those be affecting these processes? Are we accelerating extinctions? Are we inadvertently creating conditions for new, perhaps unexpected speciation events?
That's a lot to think about. Definitely food for thought on the future of life.
It really is. Worth digging deeper into some specific examples out there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the fascinating world of speciation.